So, I just got finished watching the first season of Arcane. Like so many others, I wanted to make some content expressing my experience with it, because I had my own take on taking a look at Vi as a character. I felt like some of her decisions, especially at the start of the show, seemed a bit questionable and leading to Powder's metaphorical death at the end of season 1. But also, the more I examined her decisions, the more I came to realize that the true villain of season 1 isn't actually Silco like everybody says. It's Vi. The difference for me and what I present is that, do you consider a villain to be a man who knowingly does evil deeds to good ends? Or do you consider a villain to be the one with good intentions but continuously does evil or recklessly ignorant things to evil ends? Both are definitely villainous, but for me, the latter is definitely way more villainous, and the latter is Vi. So enough talk, let's get to the actions, literally. I'll be breaking this down in the way I did initially, so we're going to talk about Vi's decisions in every episode, and hopefully I'll be able to convince you by the end that Vi has done enough evil to safely say that she is the true villain of Season 1. We're going to start at the point in Episode 1 where Vander had a one-on-one chat with Vi, where he told her, "Those kids look up to you. When people look up to you, you don't get to be selfish. You say run, they run. But whatever happens, it's on you." Let's see what decision she makes as a leader after this lesson from Vander. So at the end of the first episode, after she discusses with Vander about the responsibility of leadership, and having nothing to tie them to the attack that they made, Powder shows her the unstable hex tech. Vi immediately tells her that they should keep it from Vander as their little secret. You can make the argument that she didn't know the hex tech caused the explosion, of course, but overall this is a shit choice from a leader that had no idea what she was dealing with. Immediately, if she just brought the hex tech to Vander, or at least taken the hex tech from Powder until she knew what they were dealing with, Jinx never happens. Also in episode 2, the enforcers showing up would have no reason to ever be a problem. So taking a look at episode 2, Vi has another chance to confess in Vander in their one-on-one conversation about the hex tech that they stole, especially now considering that they almost died because of enforcers chasing them and her refusal to do so. You would think that a leader could learn after seeing the direct consequence to fix that. However, her inability to correct the situation after being literally presented with the risks and dangers is a direct result of her failure as a leader. But at the end of the episode, she does get a redeeming moment because she talks with Vander and Vander causes her to realize her responsibility. So she goes to take the fall for her team. This is honestly one of Vi's only really good decision moments, so let's take them while we can, right? Let's take a look at episode 3, and Vander is kidnapped. And this is truly an episode where Vi really goes to shit as a leader. Powder is told that she can't go with her family to rescue their father. It's a really shit decision made by a shit leader. You can argue that bringing Powder adds risk to the mission, but leaving behind your 7-year-old sister on a mission where your family is going to be at risk and possibly die is a surefire way to build isolation, helplessness, loneliness, and desperation, as we saw from Jinx. Even if everything went right, they got back to Vander without a hitch, and nobody was hurt, this would still be an emotionally devastating decision and definitely a poor one as a leader. Vi even had proof that Powder didn't even fail the last mission. She had the hex tech, and she managed to get out with it. Plus, in episode 2, she was able to prove her marksman abilities. So I failed to see how bringing Powder was really that big of a risk. If Vi simply utilized the strengths of Powder, her marksmanship, she could have helped save her father and not been emotionally damaged. Emotionally and tactically, this is a failure as a leader to utilize the strengths of their team. And that's on her. Once Jinx realizes that she actually has bombs, and she's been told that she has no other way to help her family, of course she's going to use the bombs to do whatever she can for them. If Jinx was on the mission in the first place, being utilized for her proper marksmanship abilities, this would never have happened at all. If Vi ever owned up to Jinx having the stolen goods that almost got them killed in the last episode, remember, and ever told Vander, this never would have happened. But now we have a 7-year-old child that's been abandoned and has bombs and a family at risk. All because of the decisions that Vi has made at this point, even without knowing they were bombs. What do you think she's going to do, though? She's going to go save her family. In the aftermath of the explosions, Vi physically and emotionally abuses and berates her sister, despite the fact that this entire situation is her fault, as we mentioned. But we're now slapping her 7-year-old sister for trying to save her family from an obviously desperate situation that frankly they didn't have an answer for. It was pretty apparent that none of them had the strength to fight what they were fighting, that's why they locked themselves off. And Jinx didn't act until her family was clearly in desperate straits, not understanding the consequences of what bombs could do. I understand that anger isn't always fair, and that Vi had reason to be angry. But this is a failure to remember one of Vander's lessons as well, which she does remember when she glanced at her wrist. Vander saying, "That path, it's not going to solve your problems, it just makes more of them." But let's not pretend like this entire situation isn't Vi's fault in the first place. Then she abandons her sister, perhaps to blow off some steam and mend her wounds. But now you have a 7-year-old who is all alone in the street crying because she's been abandoned. What a great choice by a sister and a leader. Now let's take a look at what the real-world example of this would be. Let's say you had 2 kids, one was 7, one was 13, and they were in your house, and the 7-year-old left the stove on. The 13-year-old saw the stove on, didn't say anything, and the house eventually did burn down, causing the death of one of their parents. Who do you think would be more accountable there? The 13-year-old then tells her 7-year-old sister how their dad's death is their fault and slaps her and abandons her. Why aren't we treating this like this was Vi's fault? She could have turned off the stove in this sense, and she had more knowledge of what would happen if she didn't. She's an abusive and awful sister in this episode, and projecting the issues that she could have solved if she made more than one good decision as a leader ever. She was responsible. Period. And she abused her sister physically and emotionally and left her in the street. Now we're going to skip episode 4, mostly because Vi isn't really in episode 4. So let's go on to episode 5. In episode 5, Vi meets up with Caitlin and identifies that the attacks were done by Jinx. So as they go down to the Undercity, she ditches Caitlin to go look for Jinx on her own, which is basically the last time we get to see Vi act for her sister before she gets hormonal, realizing Kate is hot and at least attracted to women from seeing her in the brothel. Caitlin does save Vi's life, and this does develop relationships very quickly, as has been proven. But honestly, the fact that enforcers had killed her parents, enforcers had shown nothing but hostility and injustice towards her and her family growing up, makes this shift a little bit too sudden. Similar to Powder's shift to supporting Silco immediately, I would have preferred that these transitions be shown over time rather than immediately. However, I'm guessing they didn't have the time or luxury of extra episodes to do so. Now let's talk about the last scene in Season 6 after Powder calls for her sister after learning she's alive. Now a lot of people really do screw over Powder in this episode. First off is Caitlin. Honestly, she made it pretty clear that she was on a mission, that Jinx is her enemy, that attacked her, almost killed her, and that she needs proof, aka the gemstone, in order for the council to act. Caitlin acted entirely within her moral rights in being. I honestly have no issues with her. The fact that Vi failed to realize that Caitlin's objectives made her a literal enemy to her sister, and made Powder question Vi's motive to meet her entirely, is another one of Vi's failures through her inability to be a good sister. Now let's talk about Vi, because frankly she screwed over her sister a lot this episode. After meeting up with Powder and seeing Caitlin show up, she should have told Caitlin to leave immediately. That's the responsible thing to do. Her last experience with her sister was traumatizing and abusing her, and now she expects her to show up with her actual enemy and saying, "We can work this out," because she has the hots for Caitlin. Like, honestly, what? Trauma survivors in their recovery need time and patience before dealing with exposure, even if we weren't talking about an actual enemy, which she was. Vi neither had the time nor the patience to deal with the trauma that she inflicted on her own sister. Fuck you, Vi. Seriously. This is the second episode where you have shown actions so lacking in common sense by thinking that you can resolve Caitlyn and Jinx's differences. That honestly, I can only perceive it as villainous at this point. You chose an enforcer that you've known for less than a month over your sister and her traumas that you left her with. Now we talk about Echo. Now this dude has been pretty much heralded as a hero throughout the show, so I think he really, really needs to get a slap for this episode, more than he's getting. Dude swept in openly firing on Powder and took Vi away from Powder, basically for the only reason of she's too far gone, despite the fact that Vi was her sister and was literally in the process of helping her sister come back. Powder heard Vi and Silco's conversation and immediately called to bring her sister over. How is that too far gone? Fuck you, Echo. Stop trying to intervene in family matters because you think you know what's best for them. You're a real piece of shit for this, honestly, and you screwed it up. Honestly, though, trying to expose your traumatized sister who's been left alone for years to accept an enforcer who has directly and historically been antagonistic towards them is just so ignorant of how you treat trauma survivors. At this point, it's just ridiculous. But let's get to the last episode, and the most heinous episode of all that we're going to talk about here. Episode 7. So Vi decides again that she has to try and save her sister, despite the fact that she's been the one to fail literally every time. Everything has been her responsibility, and she has to save her sister. It's ridiculous. Powder didn't fail her. She thought her sister was dead, and immediately after finding out that she was alive, she ditched Silco to signal for her. Vi, she's done everything from emotionally and physically abuse her sister, abandon her sister, trying to expose a trauma victim to accept the embodiment of her enemy because she's attracted to her. It's just the worst freaking sister on the planet, especially since she's not recognizing all of the accountability she has. At this point, all Jinx has established is that her sister came to see her again with an enforcer, and Vi thought her sister would be untraumatized and able to accept the situation immediately, and now she sees that her gemstone and Vi are gone. The gemstone which she got to prove to Silco that she isn't weak or a failure, which if you take a look at episode 6, after she meets Vi again, she drops the gemstone as a metaphor for letting Silco go. After she did glance to the gemstone after throwing the torch, because she thought that Silco was her only family and Vi wasn't coming. So this gemstone is like a metaphor of her attachment with Silco. And now it's gone and Vi is gone. So Powder going to attack the bridge and get the gemstone that she needs to survive without her sister is quite literally I can't begrudge Powder for attacking there. For the same reason I don't begrudge Caitlyn for her actions in the last episode. These were actions that Powder needed to take to survive, especially unknowing of what her sister is doing. But at the end of this episode, Vi voluntarily abandons Jinx again. And not only that, she voluntarily abandons her on a bridge with somebody who has expressed that she's too far gone, has opened fire on her in the last episode, and actually attempts to kill her in this episode. So now you're leaving your sister with somebody who's actually going to attack her. How is this not the most evil thing in the show? Vi is not family after this episode. There is no way you can consider her family. She's done everything to screw her sister up and nothing to help her. And everything she's done has been either evil or so incredibly lacking in common sense that it has to be considered as evil. So there you go. Imagine, though, if there was no Singed, what would have happened? Jinx would have died. You get Vi fighting her way back to the Undercity only to realize that Echo killed her sister when she left her on the bridge. How is that not her responsibility? It is. Episode 8 and 9, I'm not going to include them simply because she got messed up after this, but we'll talk about them a little bit. Just to conclude, Jinx expresses that Vi's changed in episode 9, and we can talk about that a little bit. We already have. But Vi just simply doesn't unconditionally love Jinx, despite the fact that her traumatization and her mentality is entirely her fault. Jinx still loves Vi and continuously reaches out for her as Vi reaches to get to her. And the love that she has for Vi does get Silco shot. Silco, at this point in her relationship with Jinx, is a man that's only expressed unconditional love. He's never traumatized her, and did everything in his power to keep her safe and alive. He died telling you to be who you are because you're perfect. Literally the opposite of Vi at this point, who's dragged her sister into trauma and neglect on multiple occasions, voluntarily or not so. Who would you choose to be in this situation? Let's be clear. Vi stands for villain. Season 1 was almost brought to a peace, but the failure of Vi to be a responsible leader, or anything but horrifically awful and evil to her sister, is responsible for the birth of Jinx and the death of Powder. Not what she said to her that one time, but what she did on almost every occasion was so heinous that I don't think anything Silco did in Season 1 can even come close to matching the villainy of Vi in Season 1. Hey, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I know this was a pretty long video, so take that for what it is. And I might be uploading some more arcane content if there's interest. So let me know in the comments section. And like and subscribe if you have the time. I do appreciate it. Bye.